So 50% of the species assessed were not being fished sustainably. Now, that can mean they've either been overfished in the past, or they're still being overfished, or they're recovering from being overfished, or we just simply don't know and don't have the data available for particular species.
One for Mum, one for Dad, and one for the country.
And there has never been a more exciting time to be an Australian.
Budgets are about choices, Fran, and you show what you value through the choices you make.
Dead, buried, cremated.
This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared. Won't hurt.
Australia's basically done for. We'll just end up being a third-rate economy. You know, a banana republic.
How good is Australia?
Just follow the money.
G'day and welcome to Follow the Money, the Australia Institute's podcast demystifying the big economic issues in Australia and putting them in plain English. I'm Ebony Bennett, Deputy Director at the Australia Institute, and today we're headed down south to Tasmania, which has a state election coming up on the 1st of May. I'm actually in Launceston and I'm here with Eloise Carr, the Director of the Australia Institute Tasmania. And we're here because last night we held a candidates forum here in the electorate of Bass. A lot of the questions from the audience last night were about good governance, which has been a really big election issue here, and the Australia Institute in Tasmania has released a lot of research on how to improve Tasmania's governance and accountability, because it's pretty shabby in a lot of ways. But today we actually want to talk to you about another huge policy issue here in Tasmania, the governance and management of Tasmania's marine environment and its coastal waters. Tasmania, as we all know, is gorgeous. It's a unique and special place, wild in many parts and nestled inside a spectacular coastline. This island is home to diverse marine ecosystems that support many regional economies, hold cultural significance for many First Nations communities, and provide recreation for hundreds and thousands of residents and visitors. Tasmania is also home to a large proportion of Australia's salmon industry, and the rapid expansion of salmon farming in Tassie has become a big concern to the community. It's also affected by climate change. Tasmania's east coast is warming about 4 times faster than the global average. There's problems with overfishing, land-based pollution, and all of these are combining together to really put Tasmania's marine environment at risk and under pressure.
Some of the country's most eminent scientists are issuing a stark warning today that ecosystems right across Australia and Antarctica are collapsing.
The slow-growing gondwan and conifers native to Tasmania can live for up to 1,000 years. But large fires across their habitat have destroyed hundreds of these ancient tree communities.
Did you know that around 90% of Tasmania's marine life is unique?
The major drawcard has always been thick swathes of giant kelp forests, which are disappearing. CSIRO data collected off Maria Island over a longer period suggests Tasmania's east coast is warming at 4 times the global average.
We've gone from just a handful of urchins on the east coast of Tassie to now an estimated 20 million.
Most Australian salmon isn't wild, it's farmed.
The Senate inquiry conducting its investigation into the regulation of the fish farm industry in Tasmania, sitting in Hobart today.
They discovered up to 20 protected Australian fur seals trapped in a salmon pen, allegedly left without food for days.
How well is the regulatory system around aquaculture in Tassie? And absolutely.
2 days now we've had the state government talking up the success and the importance of the fish farming industry.
I'm advised that the department processes were appropriate. The rules and regulations in and around seals are there to protect fish farm workers in particular. And of course,
the government chooses time and again to put industry productivity first before animal welfare and the environment.
And the industry dumps 10.6 million kilograms of fish feces a year into our ocean, creating marine dead zones under salmon pens. To take action, visit...
So today, Eloise and I are going to take you through some of these issues and what we can do to manage Tasmania's marine environment better. G'day, Eloise.
Hi, Ebony.
So give me a big picture overview to begin with of what's happening with Tasmania's marine environment.
So we've got a range of concerns happening around the state. As you mentioned, global warming is causing the east coast waters to warm 4 times faster than the global average. We've got range expansions happening and redistribution of species. We've got overfishing. We've got land-based sources of pollution. We've got industries wanting to expand, like the salmon industry. And all of this is combined with poor government planning, which means we really need to have a look at how we're doing this and how we can do it better.
So we'll get into the rapid expansion of the salmon industry in just a second, because I know the Australia Institute in Tasmania has done a lot of research on that. But I do just want to ask you, you briefly mentioned there the expansion of certain species, and that they're coming into areas that they shouldn't be, or I guess leaving areas where they should be. What's happening with that? Is that a global warming phenomenon?
Yeah, so the East Coast current is coming further south and lasting longer, and with it it's bringing a bunch of different species like the spiny sea urchin from New South Wales. That's combining with overfishing of large rock lobsters, which is leading to urchin barrens on the East Coast.
What do you mean by urchin barrens? What's that?
So imagine if you were underwater and you would see a healthy rocky reef with lots of algae and fish swimming around. What I mean by an urchin barren is literally bare rock, which is what's left behind when these urchins go nuts without the natural predators being there to eat them. And
because they're in waters that they really shouldn't be.
Yeah.
So you've talked a little bit about the rapid expansion of the salmon industry. How big is the salmon industry in Tasmania, and how big is it going to get?
So the state government has put on the table they would like to see the industry double by 2030 in size. So basically the science hasn't been able to keep up with the pace of the expansion of the industry, and we're seeing a whole bunch of impacts from high nutrient loads, jellyfish and algal blooms, impacts on rare and threatened and endangered species. There's also been some concerns around biosecurity raised, and there's a bunch of amenity-related issues. So for other users of the marine environment, which have to deal with the salmon farms being in their space. So recreational fishers and boaters and other users of the marine environment.
And for people who haven't been to a salmon farm or know what that is like, when you talk about impacts on amenity, like what kind of problems would recreational fishers have if there's, a big salmon farm nearby?
Well, there's changes to the marine ecosystems happening, but there's also concerns with marine debris. There's noise. I don't live near a salmon farm, but I understand that from people who do that they're quite noisy and they have long hours. It can affect people's sleep if you live on the coast near one of these salmon farms.
One of Australia's top authors is accusing Tasmanian governments, Liberal and Labor, of ruining the state's environment for the sake of the salmon farming industry. Booker Prize-winning author and Tasmanian Richard Flanagan says the secret of industry's
The law states there is to be no impact 35 metres beyond the fish farm. Underneath the fish farms, they're allowed to be complete dead zones. But you go anywhere in these coastal areas where the fish farms are and you'll find damage kilometres away. And as I say, where I wrote my books and where this extraordinary environment was so important to me, but it's so important to ordinary Tasmanians who fish there, who swim there, who surf there, who go boating there. I saw the crayfish vanish, the abalone vanish, then the flathead vanished, the dolphins went, the penguins went, and what we're left with are jellyfish and seals, and the seals have flooded in to feed on the salmon.
So, Eloise, tell me about the size of the salmon industry in Tasmania. I know in the past there's been concerns about logging, and just like the mining industry on the mainland, it seems very hard to get conservation outcomes because of, this idea that logging, mining are kind of huge employers in the Tasmanian economy. I imagine similar arguments are made about reining in the rapid expansion of the salmon farming industry in Tasmania. Just how big is salmon farming in Tasmania's economy? Is it a big employer? Give us an overview.
So the economic benefits of the salmon industry have been weighted pretty strongly against the environmental and social impacts. It only accounts for around 1% of jobs in the state. $3.8 billion worth of fish was sold over the last 5 years, but just $64 million was paid in tax, and $9.3 million in subsidies were received by the industry.
Do you think Tasmanians would be under the impression that this is kind of a huge employer, but the reality is 99% of Tasmanians don't work in the industry?
Yeah.
So moving now, I want to talk a little bit about overfishing in general. How much of a problem is that, and what kind of impact does that have on the marine environment?
So I'll talk about the scalefish fisheries for a start, which is basically a mixed bunch of species of what you and I would think about when you put a line in the water on the weekend and pull out a fish. It's not shellfish or lobsters or abalone. It's the scalefish fishery. By their own assessment last year, so 50% of the species assessed were not being fished sustainably. Now that can mean they've either been overfished in the past, or they're still being overfished, or they're recovering from being overfished, or we just simply don't know and don't have the data available for particular species.
I want to turn now to the actual governance of Tasmania's marine ecosystems. How does Tasmania compare to how other states might manage their coastal waters?
So Tassie's really behind compared to all other jurisdictions in Australia. Commonwealth and other states have all gone through, to varying degrees, a process of planning at a statewide level around all the different uses and users of the marine environment. For example, Victoria in 2018 had a whole new legislative framework which requires them to have regional marine plans for the whole state, which goes through a comprehensive planning process. By that I mean you look at all the different industries, all the different uses, including recreational fishing or just recreational use of the marine environment, like you would when you go out kayaking or diving or whatever. And it finds all the different places where that's appropriate for different uses to take place, and it basically puts it into a plan, like a spatial plan, like you would, urban planning on land. It's the same sort of concept, but in the sea.
And Tasmania has nothing like that?
Nothing at all.
And so the Australia Institute has looked into what we think should help improve the management of Tassie's coastal waters. What is it that you're advocating for?
So the science tells us we should undertake a comprehensive statewide marine planning process, which is a consultative process. We think a parliamentary inquiry would be a good mechanism to review how the government is currently managing the marine environment and how it should be done. And we think that given the considerations with the rapid expansion of the salmon industry, that we should have a pause on any further expansion of the salmon farms until we can consider all the different government processes that are currently underway into salmon farming and figure out the issues that are coming out of those.
And those are some ways that we could improve it. But really, who is it that's missing out in the governance at the moment? So who is it that the government listens to when it makes marine policy decisions, and who's kind of not at the table for those conversations?
So there's at least 4 different processes happening at the moment into the salmon farming industry. There's spatial planning process, there's a parliamentary inquiry, there's a industry expansion plan that's being reviewed, and they're all underway. And because the state election was called, we were waiting on the outcomes of all those processes, but that's now been delayed. So I think that's another reason why we might want to just pause the expansion until we find out the issues coming out of those reviews and think about what we might want to do about the issues that are raised. And so we've got poor government planning and a lack of integrated consideration of what we want from our marine environment. The government is keen to expand industry, and there are serious environmental problems in terms of climate change and other pressures. So I would say the marine environment's missing from the table at the moment, and we need to have someone speaking for the environment as part of those considerations.
Excellent. Well, we might leave it there. Thanks very much, Eloise. This episode was recorded on Wednesday, the 21st of April 2021, and things may have changed since recording. You can visit the australiainstitute.org.au for all our latest research and content, and we're on Twitter at the Oz Institute with an AUS. My Twitter handle is Ebony_Bennett with a NNT, and Eloise Carr is at Ginevra E. That's GENEVERAE. This episode was produced by Jennifer Macy, and our theme music is by Jonathan McFeet from Pulse and Thrum, with additional music from Blue Dot Sessions. Stay safe out there, stay 1.5 metres away, and thanks for listening.